Welcome to the Hidden Bookcase. Come through and get cozy. Pick a book, your favourite book, that's the one that opens this room. Inside you'll find a warm fire, a loving cat, and a wide skylight to the stars.
And a dangerously high to-be-read pile.
I'm Morgan, I use they-them pronouns, and I am a price greater than rubies.
I'm Soren, I use he-him pronouns, and I am a letter that can't be read without ruining the seal.
We've been friends for over a decade and are always swapping books.
Typically, we take it in turns to recommend one another a favourite read. This time we're rereading a mutual favourite to fit in with our sapphics and space theme for the summer.
So today let's get to talking about...
This is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone.
Soren, how do we talk about this book?
I don't know. Our format's already out the window because I actually don't know which one of us read this first, even. Was it me?
I think it must have been you. As with all things that we discovered in our teenage years, you read it, /watched it, /consumed it.
I literally have no idea when I first read this. I don't know. But also, actually, I added it on February the 2nd, 2020 to Goodreads. And then I finished it on February the 15th. So maybe that was a reread. But I'm pretty sure I've read it 4 times. So I think that that's not accurate. So probably I did actually read it as a teenager. Do I know why? I don't know. I don't remember if someone recommended it to me. I don't remember if I saw it on the internet. No clue.
My date added is June 13th, 2020.
There you go. Maybe I just saw it in the bookshop and picked it up. I'm lost now. I have no idea.
I feel like I probably most likely found it on a Tumblr post of sapphic things. I feel like sapphic sci-fi posts on Tumblr, as with A Memory Called Empire that we did in a previous episode. I feel like that was a very common thing to see. I have a vivid memory of seeing it on the shelf in Forbidden Planet in London and going, oh, I really want to buy that. Oh, it's $10.99 for 200 pages. I'm not buying that. And I think maybe I might have gotten it for Christmas in that case.
I listened to it initially. I listened to it every time until this time, and I decided to read it this time to see if the experience would be different. So maybe I just came across it on Audible or something and thought this looks interesting. Who knows at this point? But we read it. We both read it. At some point, we both read it and loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And are we going to explain what it's about?
2 agents from rival possible futures communicate through letters on battlefields and slowly fall in love.
I think that's pretty good.
I mean, they fall in love quite fast, to be perfectly honest, but...
Yeah.
Fast and slow, because it takes them hundreds of years, but also 4 letters.
Yeah, exactly. Hundreds of years, but only a few pages.
You know, they've been flirting on and off through the battlefield for centuries beforehand, so I feel like they're allowed.
Exactly. And then obviously we won't. Well, I suppose this is a bit weird because usually we don't start spoiling things until after we've got through a blind, but we have no blind. But if you've got to the end of this book, you also know that they've kind of been flirting forever.
Yeah. Cut off now. Spoilers, everybody. Leave.
Yeah, we're just going straight into it today.
Yeah. They've been flirting since the beginning. They saved each other's lives.
It's a cycle. They're flirting again.
They couldn't have lived without having already done these things, but also they only lived because they'd done, timey-wimey nonsense. Beautiful.
To be fair, I feel like as far as time travel goes, and we know, I've said it on this show before, I'm very, very fussy about time travel. If it doesn't make sense, I get annoyed. I feel like this makes sense. To me, it makes sense. Time travel's not real. Let's get that out in the open before somebody says, hey, Soren, what are you talking about? But to me, this is coherent, which I think is the most important thing, to be fair.
Yeah. It feels like fate,
and
it's close enough to fantasy that it's all good. If you try and think too hard about time travel, it never makes sense if you actually think about it for longer than 4 seconds. So, if you lean into it being more fantastical, I feel like you can have more fun.
Yeah, because I think if you're reading this as allegorical for soulmates or fate or something, which is kind of what it's doing, then you probably are having more fun than if you start going, well, if somebody created the universe, who created that person who created the universe? You end up in that infinite loop. And to me, that kind of makes sense. I feel like that always gets brought up as a thing. They're like, it doesn't make any sense for there to be an infinite chain of creators. And I'm like, there could be. I don't think we can comprehend it. But that makes sense to me. Or there being an infinite time loop. I can't understand it. But why should I have to understand it for it to exist?
Yeah.
We're getting very philosophical immediately on the show.
I think the fact that the entirety of this is very soft magic system vibes in terms of how the future works, how their abilities work, how they exist in the world, how they travel up and down thread, or through different universes because it's so soft in its description and it's basically just poetry.
Yeah.
It's all good. It all fits the vibe, so it doesn't feel out of place.
Yeah, if it was trying to explain in great detail how all of this moving around in time was working, and even how these letters are sort of being written, like you have sort of, again, like a soft understanding, like an emotional understanding of how it works in terms of like you have like a vague, okay, it's something to do with DNA sequencing, that all makes sense. You know, it's patterns, it's that kind of thing. But if you think about it too much, then it gets confusing. But you're just not supposed to.
You're not supposed to. There are spiders and wolves and eyes in the stars, and that's legit.
That's just how it is. I think with the time travel aspect, it's interesting to have something that is predetermined, because I feel like that is the issue with almost all storytelling. Like, I feel like when you approach a story, there is that element of this is always going to go in a certain way. How do you keep your audience invested in such a way that it feels like there isn't a predetermined ending? And this has one, and it still works.
As my creative writing professor would say last term, if I can see your hand, it's bad. Because you know how it's going to go the whole time. The audience knows that there's a predetermined ending. But it's all about making the audience forget that your hand is the one moving the actions. So all of the cause and effect and consequences need to feel set up, which is why you can't have Deus Ex Machina unless Deus Ex Machina is the point. Because then that's just your hand going, and then this happens.
How did you find this on a reread from that point of view?
I enjoyed it. I think, I don't remember how I felt when I first read it. I kind of just was like, wow, I feel emotionally moved. Time to move on now. Oh boy. Whereas I feel like this time it felt more cozy.
Yeah.
I didn't remember that they'd saved each other in any way.
Okay.
I just remembered that at the end, Red broke into Garden.
Yes.
So I knew we were going towards that point. And I completely forgot that the Seeker was Red. I thought the Seeker was each other, like checking up after each letter.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then I was like, no, wait, of course that, because they would have just said,
yeah,
this is blue, this is red. But obviously, it's somebody else who's been obfuscated from the narrative for a reason. And even when, like, she confronted herself and then jumped off a cliff, I was still like, who's the Seeker? I don't remember. So it's basically like reading it for the first time, to be honest.
Fair enough. Because I'm in the position of, like, I think this is my fourth reread, so I'm like, I know it fairly well. So I was like, I remember who the Seeker is. I remember how this ends. But it was really interesting seeing all that foreshadowing. I feel like I get something out of this again every time I reread it. Like, I would reread it again tomorrow and not complain. I would be happy to do that.
Yeah. I feel like I would love to reread it now that I remember the things. Because it is so carefully threaded that it doesn't feel like a surprise when everything falls into place.
Yeah. Everything's been laid really delicately, like to the point where I was like, oh, I remember how this ends, but then I was still missing some of the foreshadowing until after. Like, when Red is breaking into Garden, I was like, oh yeah, because earlier Blue basically explains to Red how to get to Garden, but when I was reading that passage, I forgot that needed to be communicated so that Red would have a reasonable way of getting into Garden. Like, it was just so beautifully written and so natural that I wasn't like, oh, actually this is like an info dump, like this is necessary lore and setup. I was just like, wow, I'm being carried along.
I wonder, the authors' names are in blue and red. Do we think that corresponds to which character they were writing, or do we think...
I feel like I looked this up at one point and I feel like the answer was yes.
Because the prose feels so fluid the entire time. I didn't feel like I could discern two different writing styles clashing. It felt like one very unified voice, which is very impressive, obviously.
I feel like I found this in an interview at some point.
Are they married?
Not to each other.
Okay.
So, I mean, yes, technically. I do think it's, obviously, fiction's fiction, and you can, like, make a project with anyone, but it's so intimate and so romantic that I don't know how it would feel as the spouse. I don't want to speculate on their personal lives.
It's like my old D&D group. Our DM was dating one of the players, and me and the DM would have full-on 10-minute, like, romantic conversations, because he was also playing my wife, where we'd have these whole really emotionally charged conversations and like went back and forth and people cried. The DM's girlfriend was just sitting there. Eventually the DM's girlfriend got involved in the polycule, so, you know, we vibe. Her character, I mean.
Yeah, I was in character X's with a friend while his long-term girlfriend was the DM, so that was also a fun dynamic, even though we had a very unhealthy encouraged relationship, so it wasn't like romance was going... Sometimes romance was going on. There were moments.
I feel like you get so into the characters that it doesn't get awkward as people. Or I feel like maybe that's just me completely missing social cues. But for me personally, as an Arrow Ace person, maybe it's that, or maybe it's the autism. I don't know. But I feel like whenever I'm in my character, I'm so in my character that I just completely forget that the people opposite me are like my friends. I just think of them as their characters, and I really do get into it that way.
I think same.
It's the writers in us.
Yeah. So I'm sure that they had something similar if they did take turns, and I can't seem to find an answer on that.
Soren from the future here. This was really nagging at me, and I tracked down a review in sci-fi magazine Strange Horizons that states that Gladstone wrote red and El-Mohtar wrote blue, which does track from what I know of their writing as individuals, but also the reviewer doesn't really give a source for that information, so take it with a grain of salt, and if anyone does have a source, please let us know. We're very curious.
One thing I did see in their author's note, because obviously, if anybody exists in the queer sci-fi fantasy world in any way, they've consumed Steven Universe in some form of another. And obviously, you have Sapphire and Ruby in that, and that is a very important relationship, and they are blue and red-coded characters. And lo and behold, at the end of this book, it goes, "Thank you to Amal's parents, generously tolerating our occupation of the living room table with exclamation point laden notes and singing Steven Universe songs."
Amazing.
They have, in fact, consumed Steven Universe. The Ruby and Sapphire and blue and red correlation is there, potentially.
The more I think about that, the more it makes sense as well, because of the whole coding of, like, red and blue being, like, the same person in terms of having each other's DNA, and that metaphor being used of them having helixes wound together towards the end of it. And to those who are not familiar with Steven Universe, this is technically a Steven Universe spoiler, but it's been like 10 years, so, you know, it's not the big one. So I feel like we can say that Garnet is Sapphire and Ruby's amalgamation, a third character who enjoys being one person most of the time, rather than the two separate people that make her up. So there's definitely some resonance there.
And I feel like their character coding is also fairly similar, in the sort of like rushing in and being fairly destructive and impulsive versus the sort of take the time, look into the future, see what's happening.
Yeah.
Figure it out from there.
I always forget how funny Red is. What's the thing that she says in her first letter? Hang on. "Thus we braid strand 6 to strand 9, and our glorious crystal future shines so bright, I gotta wear shades, as the prophets say."
Honestly, that first letter, I read that and was like, Gideon the Ninth? Is that
Gideon
you?
the Ninth. It's so Gideon the Ninth. They would get along.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about the yearning.
The yearning was also somehow sounding like a cringe teen from mid-2000s Tumblr. It's the multitudes.
Exactly.
I did love all of the inserts that were like, "as the prophets say," and then insert random 21st century reference.
I feel like this has that thing of, which episode was it? Oh, it was A Memory Called Empire, which came out earlier in our summer season, just 2 or 3 episodes ago, where we were talking about academic references versus modern references. And I feel like this blends them together in such a fun way, because you get loads of, like, you get, like, Blue Dabba Dee when Red is addressing Blue, but then you get a lot of, like, romantic poetry and art, and it's just a nice spreading of those things. And a lot of science as well, which I personally really love.
Yes. I did feel like I was slowly more and more putting this in my light academia folder, just for the sheer amount of cross-referencing. There was one particular reference, and I don't remember what it was, but I was like, it's a reference that isn't explained. And like, I know most references aren't explained, but it was a specific one where I was like, this has to be dark academia coded at this point, because I understood it only because of like some random TV show that I'd watched.
Was it the Death of Chatterton painting? Because that doesn't get explained, but it's really important.
I just vibed over that. I didn't even look it up.
Did you miss that? It's the mural when Red is like, "Oh, you died in this specific position." It's that painting. I'm sure we looked at it in English class.
Maybe.
Because he has the blue trousers and he has the very dramatic pose in the open window. If you're listening to this and you have read this book and you haven't seen the painting, I would recommend Googling it. Who's it by? Henry Wallace. It's pre-Raphaelite, apparently. The internet's telling me that. I didn't know that off the top of my head. But it has that dramatic composition that Red eventually recognises, and that Blue would definitely have recognised because she's such a nerd. I would get along with her, I think.
Yep. No, I think this is definitely dark academia. Like, the stuff about Blake scribbling apocalypses. I studied that poem so many times. in so many different ways.
Yeah, I mean, there's an Ozymandias reference in like the first letter, so... and then it comes back at the end.
That is so true.
And I will say, Morgan knows my very sad experience of trying to go to a book club for the first time because they were doing this book, and this being one of my favourite books, and everyone there turning up and saying that they absolutely hated it and that they didn't get through it, pretty much. I think one person finished it out of about 20, which hurt my feelings deeply and made for a very awkward vibe because, you know, you're new there, and then everyone's like, but what did you like about it? And you don't really want to talk because everyone disagrees with you and has already stated that they disagree with you. But that said, I do think that this book is a little bit Marmitey in terms of it's not very accessible on that front. Like, I think you can get away with, like, if you know some of the references, it's fine. I think if you genuinely know none, and I know for some of the people that I was talking to at that book club, like, they didn't go through the English education system, for example, so they were like, so much of this is just going over my head. I have no anchor point. And then on top of that, you know, I'm an ESL speaker. It's using a lot of florid language, fancy vocabulary, which is something that I love, but I appreciate that if you're having to stop to look up like a bunch of words, it is going to be annoying. So I do kind of understand where people are coming from on that front. I think it gets that kind of criticism, and I think I wouldn't say it deserves that criticism because I don't feel like every book has to be for everyone, but I understand it. So
yeah.
When people say that, I'm kind of like, yeah, but I love it though.
Yeah, it's very much a niche book, and I think I'm going to put my foot down and say it is academia of some description. Yeah. When I first read it, I must have we all know on this podcast now, if I don't get something, I just vibe over it until it makes sense, or I assume that it didn't need to make sense. So I can go through a book without understanding half of it and still be like, yeah, it was a solid read.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I found the reference I was talking about earlier. And it's just, she thinks of ortolans as she chews. And I have no idea what those were before I watched Hannibal season 2. And now I'm like, oh, yeah. I know about the cloths you have to put over your face because you have to hide from God when you're eating them. Yada, yada, yada. And that would not have hit in any way when I was 20. Whereas now I'm like, this makes sense.
There's stuff I pick up on every reread as well. Yeah.
One reference I did really love, which is not even a reference, I just find it funny, is when she talks about how no one can ride the circle line forever.
I loved that as well. Maybe you can, Red.
Well, you can't anymore now that they've not made it a circle, but...
That's true.
But I found it deeply funny. I liked the fixation on England because it meant I understood more of the references.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I was like, on the grand scheme of things, it does sort of seem a bit counterintuitive because it's like we're dealing with all of time and space here, essentially. So why are we spending so much time in England? But then that is also my frame of reference. So I was like, well, this is useful for me personally.
I think to compare it to another book that also deals with sort of time that got criticism for that specifically was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab.
Oh, yeah.
Because obviously she exists, spoilers for that book, people, but she exists over 3 centuries. And she has to keep moving to different cities because everybody's forgetting her all the time. And the only cities she spends time in are like Paris and London and New York. And like she only spends time in Western cities. And people were like, realistically, this doesn't make much sense. And you're really like cutting out a huge swathe of like time. Whereas this book, when they're talking about influential philosophies, and when they're talking about different points in Earth history at least, and how important they are to deviation, there is a lot more diversity, a lot more globality in all these different references that are coming in, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually, because when you get into those little nuggets of information about like how a different strand has gone, you get a lot of like very different world building, if you like. Like you get a world, for example, where Native American populations have been deliberately inoculated against European diseases so that they don't become ill, or the currency collapse of, I want to say, the Ming Dynasty might not occur because of trading between them and Polynesian communities. There's a lot of thinking about how the world could go which doesn't feel Eurocentric, which is very refreshing. Even if we do spend time in London, I think it balances out. Like it feels like a personality quirk of Blue's that lets you get insight into her and get to know her.
Yeah. London is definitely a her thing compared to everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is why Red likes to watch it burn. But, ooh.
Exactly. Damn. I do love how they're very, like, intense, so in an aggressive way about each other and even acknowledge it in text. It's just fun. I think sapphics don't always get to do that as well. I think there's sometimes like, they're cute and they're holding hands and these guys are like, I want to eat you. brackets flirting.
Honestly, it is so Hannibal coded, and I love it. It's so insane, psychosexual, but also psychosexually obsessed with each other mentally rather than physically, which I really enjoy. Because obviously, they haven't had sex, which is not the be all and end all. They haven't even touched
until Blue's died.
And that line, oh my god, when she's holding her, like she puts her fingers through her hair and it doesn't feel like how it's supposed to, and that's like the final nail in the coffin. Oh, that line got me.
It's so good. Oof. Oh, same.
More psychosexual obsession, please. It's more interesting. I don't care if they sleep together. I want them to be in each other's brains.
I liked as well that they actually sort of addressed that difference between sexual attraction, romantic attraction, and platonic attraction. I think it's Red is sort of mediating on it and says, I've had friends, like intimate friendships, and I've had people I've slept with, and this is something else. And I thought that was interesting just to have it be sort of acknowledged in text.
Refreshing.
Yeah. Also, I just want to say that I love that everyone important in this book is she, her. Like, gender is very, like, vague as a concept. Like, even when we were putting this in sapphics in space, I was kind of like, they are, but also only kind of because that's the label we would describe them. Like, they don't stay in the same bodies and stuff. So I don't know if they would be like, yes, we're lesbians. But they feel like they belong here.
There's that line at the very beginning of the book that says, Red looks again something like a woman.
And I think it's Red who spends some time in Genghis Khan's horde as a man. And then obviously Blue is like with a man for a long time. Presumably she slept with him at some point, but there's also like that's not like her body because they're changing bodies all the time. Like it's a very vague, it's just a sort of a queer normative situation.
Yes.
How on earth is gender and sexuality going to matter in this context? It really just doesn't.
Exactly.
These are just the pronouns.
Also, not to go back to Steven Universe again, but again, very reminiscent of that with the fact that every single one of the gems is she, her, but none of them actually have a gender.
Yeah. And I like that Commandant and Garden are also she, her when they appear sort of embodied. Like, they're a bit more concept to begin with, and then I think you get one example of Commandant being referred to as she, her about halfway through, and I remember the first time I was like, wait, hang on, what? Is it not like an organization, a governmental body? It's interesting that it's sort of like a more direct relationship, but I think that's very fun, because also it's kind of not, that's kind of representation of what it is, but it just flows together very nicely, I think. But no important he-hims in this book. Even when Red is speculating about the existence of a god, she uses she, her, and I love that.
The one thing they agree on across both the futures. Iconic.
Incredible. How do we feel about this is possibly controversial, but I feel like we should raise it. How do we feel about the kiss? Because I feel torn on the kiss, because I'm like, in one way, is it kind of weird that this ageless woman is now kissing this 5-year-old a little bit? But also I'm like, it's from such a pure situation of trying to like save her life, and it doesn't feel motivated in that way, that it kind of doesn't strike me as weird. But would I think it was weird if it was like heterosexual? Maybe, but am I just conditioned to think that way? I don't know. I just wanted to throw it out there as a discussion.
I did have a brief like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I think because the reason's motivated behind it.
Yeah, so that you don't die later. Cheers.
Yeah. But it is a bit like, could have done this another way, maybe.
When she got sick, at least, even like a teenager would be slightly less, like an 18-year-old or something. And you can imagine her not having joined Garden at that point in time, and even still seeing herself as a child, because it's like, you haven't succumbed to thousands of years of time travel and murder and this cycle of violence that you've been entrapped in and stuff.
Yeah, especially considering it's the only kiss in the book. It's a bit kind of like...
Yeah. I have seen it gain criticism for that. I kind of get that. I feel like
it would be less weird if Red had like opened her up and put shit in her and closed it back up again.
Yeah, exactly. Or even just like cut her finger and dripped a little bit of blood in there or something. Because I'm like, if you have to give her like a piece of you, then there's other ways to do that. but I think it doesn't like ruin it for me, because again, it doesn't feel like she's kissing her from a motivation of kissing her. It feels like she's kissing her from a motivation of the ends.
Yeah, she's thrown up in her mouth a little bit.
Ew.
If anything.
Like a baby bird.
Exactly. If we look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, that improves it for sure. Just a little owl pellet deposit.
There's birds on the cover. They communicate through birds. I feel like it could be an interesting way to sort of bring it full circle if they'd made that reference.
And they do a lot of bird communication in that period of time when they're sort of like not most falling for each other, but I feel like there's like a lot of relationship development happening in that situation where Blue is embedded even, and then they can't talk for a while. their to-bed conversation.
I love that this book has a quote by Madeline Miller on the back.
And Murderbot Diaries author Martha Wells.
I'd expect that more, though, and I love to see it. But it's interesting to see a quote-unquote literary fiction writer quoting sci-fi. I think that's just a nice little sort of, maybe we should destroy genre entirely.
I mean, Circe is also arguably fantasy. It's got gods running around.
Well, exactly. Circe and Song of Achilles and Greek mythology retellings in general are so, like, on the cusp between the two, but sort of genre convention has gone, yeah, you can be literary fiction as a treat.
Maybe because of the prestige of referencing Greek mythology, because like, oh, it's Greek mythology, so it has to be serious, which is interesting, actually, because now that you say that, something like, it's not a good example because it's YA, but like Raybearer, okay, that's referencing mythology, it's just referencing West African mythology, but it wouldn't get the same treatment. And fair enough, it's not in a literary style, but...
Daughter of the Moon Goddess, for example, by Sulin Tan, that is shelved in fantasy, despite being a pretty beat-for-beat retelling as far as I'm aware. Meanwhile, Song of Achilles, stuff by Jennifer Saint, all these like Greek mythology retellings get put in literary fiction.
And people talk about them very differently as well. Yeah.
Yes.
I can kind of see that she'd be quoted on this because of the very poetic bent to both of their writing. Speaking of the poetic writing, can we just talk about the writing?
Yes. I love me some purple prose. I don't give a what anybody else says. Give me purple prose. Make it obscure. Make it weird. Make it basically prose poetry. Give it to me.
I'm on the same page. Also, I think there are moments in this where you get like insane, beautiful economy of language, like some really simple turns of phrase that are the most effective. So it has both. They have the range as authors. They can do both. And then that means that all of it hits harder because they're not relying on one. A bit of language that is just like no fancy vocabulary. This is Red's confession in the letter that is the last letter in inverted commas that she can write to Blue. I love you, I love you, I love you. I'll write it in waves, in skies, in my heart. You'll never see, but you will know. I'll be all the poets. I'll kill them all and take each one's place in turn. And every time love's written, all the strands will be to you.
Yes.
It's so good. What do you even want? I don't even know what to say.
Everyone pack it up and go home. This is the best declaration of love ever. And actually, every declaration of love you've ever said is actually now hers. She's taking your skin. Have fun.
Every other romance, sorry. There just aren't anymore.
Oh, it's so good. I love all of the poetry, sort of lampshading. Like, one of my favourite quotes is literally on page 3. And it's, a fugitive becomes a queen or a scientist or worse, a poet.
Yes. I always find that funny. Especially when it's being written by poets.
Like, yes, poets are great, poets are insufferable, poets change the world. All of the above is encapsulated in this meaning.
It's also funny that that's coming from Red, because obviously Commandant doesn't really value art. That's something that we get told again and again. But then it's something that Red observes again and again, is that people do. Like when the Atlanteans are fleeing the volcano, and she's like, they're leaving everything behind except for themselves and the art. Another beautiful turn of phrase that, again, is not complicated, but always strikes me, and I remember it really well, is Red explaining that they board the boats children and gods first, because they're taking all of the idols with them. Love it.
Like, this book truly does not need to be any longer. It is the perfect length.
I think pacing-wise, it's perfect as well. Like, if you showed this to me and said, hey, these two characters are going to go from enemies to lovers, essentially, in this book, purely through letters, and they're not even going to see each other, I'd be like, how on earth are you going to do that? But they do pull it off.
Like, most of the time, I'm one of those people who's like, enemies to lovers needs to take a whole series, and they shouldn't even think about even holding hands until book 4. If the enemies are already lovers in book 1, that's not enemies to lovers, that's a speedrun. But this is allowed. This works.
They're just such good mirrors to each other that it feels like the echoes of each other in each other's letters, while still giving them both a distinct voice, which I don't understand how they do, but they do it.
I think also, to a certain extent, it's the fact that most modern current enemies to lovers is A, heterosexual, and B, usually about an oppressor who is a man and a freedom fighter who's a woman. And it's usually very tangled up in a lot of very unhealthy power dynamics.
And I think also leaning very heavily on physical attraction as the motivator. Like, often they'll, like, have a tryst before they're even not enemies anymore. They'll just be like, wow, but, like, we're just so attracted to each other, and that overpowers it. And I guess that is kind of a thing here, but because it's not necessarily sexual. I wouldn't say it's not sexual, because they're being, like...
Yeah. But it makes sense for them, because they are two very like-minded people on very equal playing fields, and no one else is on the same playing field as them. Whereas several books I've read recently, because I'm a big fan of enemies to lovers, like, if it's done right, I've read a lot of fan fiction, for example, but some of the books I've read recently, with an enemies to lovers plotline.
I think here as well, they immediately have a knife to each other's throat, because if one of them exposes the other, so they're in this together very quickly, like immediately from pretty much when Red writes her reply. That's kind of, they're kind of in it together at that point. They can't really betray each other without sinking one another. They're on an equal footing, and they both have this like bone deep isolation that they only recognize in each other, and that's the first person they've been able to connect to on this. And that feels very believable somehow. I feel like it'd be very easy for it to feel manufactured so that they would have to be lovers. Does that make sense? If you're thinking about like, how do I write these two characters in a way that they're on completely opposite sides and then they become obsessed with each other? Oh, well, we have to give them some like matchy hang up. Basically, but it doesn't feel forced. I'm not sure how that works. Maybe it's because they're not actually being completely upfront with each other to begin with in terms of like the hunger preoccupation, and then it sort of slowly comes out, and then you get little bits of acknowledgement, like when Red thanks Blue for the description of the honey and the bread. It's a very subtle, again, like it's very show not tell to the reader, which I think is also very dangerous in epistolary, because people are kind of writing about their feelings, but because these two are so repressed, they're kind of just talking around things and writing in circles. But if you're paying attention, you realize very quickly how completely on the same wavelength they are when they do little echoes of each other. There was another one that I had, not from the letters, but another example of show not tell, when Blue is reading one of the letters, and also a little bit of foreshadowing here, and we get the sentences. Briefly, she wonders if the hardness in her throat is poison, her inability to swallow around it anaphylactic. This does not frighten her. She closes her eyes against the alternative, which does. Like, now we know that they're in love with each other and you didn't have to say anything about it.
So good. Writing around the subject.
Which I think is why it doesn't come out of nowhere when they start signing. Well, when Blue signs her letter of love and then Red comes back, which is also a fun little mismatch between them, because Blue does it so subtly. She's just like, I'm just going to put it in my sign-off. And then Red's like, I love you like 100 times in the next letter. And then it's like, sorry if I misread it. But anyway, that was the vibe, right?
And then Blue's like, I've been wanting to say all these things all along, but you just say them out loud.
Like the callbacks where Blue's like, when you said this, I had already wanted to say this. And then she's like, and now I'm going to say this before you can get me there first. About the, I want to put the seeds on your tongue, which again, very gay. Homosexual activity even in the future. I'm so glad.
Just a little bit.
Thank God.
The future is just homosexual activity.
As it should be.
Who is your favourite character?
I knew you were going to ask that at some point. I was thinking about it earlier. I mean, I know it's in our format, but still. It's so hot. There's basically two options here, right?
The real MVP of this book is Mrs. Levitt, I think.
You're so right, actually.
She is single-handedly allowing these two gay messes to communicate.
The guy that invents hyperbolic algebra, was it? No, hyperbolic geometry, I think. Him. No. I think I have a slight... It's really hard because Red's so funny, but I think I have a bias towards Blue because I love her whole aesthetic. And also, I feel like the repression and the way that she talks, and also her weird preoccupations, are more relatable to me personally. And I don't know what that says about me, but that's fine. Are you on the same page?
I think I am on the same page. I think also because at the end of the day, I think Blue changes Red more than Red changes Blue. I feel like this book is more about Blue than it is about Red, because you're getting it through Red's point of view more than you're getting it through Blue's point of view. So you're more predisposed as a reader to fixate on Blue because that's what Red is doing.
Yeah, because you're kind of, you spend more time with Red, even if it's not that much more time. Yeah, and also, yeah, Blue has always had that strain of Red in her, because, as you find out by the end, that was sort of predetermined. So her apartness is already a thing. And then obviously that is true for some extent for Red as well, because she had her little, like, I'm going to go have a breakdown on a hill moment when she was a teenager. And all of that stuff. But, yeah, I know what you mean. The fact that they both save each other gets me so much.
I especially love Blue's moment of saving Red, I think, because it seems like it comes as a surprise to her.
Yes.
But it also feels like it makes logical sense at that point. And there's like, it's instinct, which is so interesting. And it's so like sudden and violent. And then she just moves on and has to reckon with what she's done. It's so interesting.
And then you get that scene of her lingering over the scar later. Oof. And then also I love that she gets the story from Red, obviously, so then, again, we have this predetermined thing where, like, this already happened by the time Blue hears about it, but then Blue goes and does it. But she got the detail from Red about the wolf-like creature walking past slowly, and she, like, does that, which is such a small detail, and arguably you could say, well, I mean, obviously she kind of has to at that point, because, again, this is like a time loop, essentially. Otherwise the whole thing falls apart and it doesn't make sense. But I feel like from an emotional point of view, it's this moment of her being like, I'm going to take every possible step I can to make sure that we do meet and that everything goes this way. Like in the way that they've been fighting for the strands to braid in a specific way for other ends, that's kind of the first time that one of them is taking it into their own hands and being like, okay, let me influence this in the way that I personally wanted to come out, because I know that I want red in my life later down the line.
And it also feels like giving her a moment of comfort.
Yeah.
In a very different way to how she has been before, because it's this moment of like sort of breaks her immersion, like breaks Red's immersion in this moment of loneliness. And I feel like because she doesn't set out to do that originally, like she's just on this planet and she's guarding this thing, and then suddenly there's Red and like everything falls into place for her, it makes it feel more like fate, but in an interesting way, rather than fate in the way of pieces on a chessboard and the author's hand.
Yeah, I could talk about it for 6 hours.
The 6 hours sort of thing where we just go round and round in circles like a figure of eight.
That line as well about them being Mobius strip bound towards the end, speaking of figure of eights. I love it. I can't believe we haven't mentioned it yet, but obviously the use of colour in this book is just so fun. It's such a like simple mechanism to like code them both as blue and red, but they use it to such a clever extent by like really picking and choosing what they use. Like that moment where Blue is comparing red to things, and then she says, I find myself talking to you about things that are red but not sweet. And the little addresses are so fun. The hex code one always makes me laugh. I think it's so stupid.
Yeah.
And then the red sky at night one, and then later in the letter when Blue references feeling like she has to shy away from Delight because there's danger in Delight, so she's going to go for the warning. That's just so gay. You're already falling in love with each other and you know it and you're acknowledging it and you're saying it. And then also that bit where she's like, oh, I didn't really notice red before we took up our correspondence, and now everything that I see that's red reminds me of you. The world sings to me in pebbles and feathers and blood. That's so good. I hate them.
Leave some love for the rest of us.
Leave some love for the rest of us. This was, honestly, I don't think it's ever made me cry, and then on this reread, for some reason, I was really close, especially towards the end. And I don't, like, it wasn't sadness, it was just, like, depth of emotion, I think. Like when people look at a painting and cry, I feel like it was that. I was just like, wow, I'm so blown away by, like, the craft that I'm going to cry. I didn't, because I was in public, but...
But it was close.
It was close. It was very close.
Yeah, I definitely cried the first time I read it. But the second time I was like, I know they're surviving. It's fine. It's not going to get me.
Are you satisfied with the ending?
I think yes. I think because it feels like they have both gone through an emotional journey and have both come out as equal players. They've definitely moved.
They've changed.
They've changed, exactly.
Yeah.
And also because I just finished another book, which I did love, but just ends, and you're like, that was half a story, my guy. I like, respectfully, that was half a story. Like, I did give it 5 stars, and I did enjoy it a lot, but that was half a story. So I think this is more satisfying than that.
Yeah.
And it feels like there would be no other place to end it, because essentially, you could go on forever, you know? Like, it could just keep going of them, like, making this place together. And maybe you could do an epilogue of them, like, sitting in the tea and drinking sun, but I think it's more interesting to sort of go, and maybe they went off into the sunset, or maybe they died.
Sitting in the tea and drinking sun. I know that's not what you meant, but actually that's quite pretty.
Did I say that?
You said it like that, yeah.
No! Let me say it again.
You're in poetic mode. No, it's like at the end when Blue dies and they're like, she's wrapped in sunlight.
You know, I'll take that. It's my inner poet coming out.
It's your inner poet coming out. No, I think I agree with you, though. I feel like that is the most logical endpoint where we've kind of like come to the end of the loop and we understand like how we got here, and we've had this very clear character development, and then we know that they get, because you could probably leave it right before, like I think arguably you could cut Blue's last letter, but I think that would be unsatisfying. I think knowing that they're going off and going to go do their Bonnie and Clyde routine, and even knowing that the odds are probably pretty insurmountable from everything you understand up until this point, it's still satisfying because you have that like, well, maybe they'll be okay.
I think also because if you did leave it before Blue's last letter, there could be people who argue that Blue didn't survive.
Yeah.
And I feel like, given the history of Bury Your Gaze, I think it's narratively satisfying to be like, don't worry, she lived. But now they've actually got to get out alive, which is unlikely. So we're going to leave them in this moment where they're both definitely still alive.
Yeah, and they're together again, or together for the first time, pretty much, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's really funny that that's actually like the only interaction we get is Blue pretending to be a guard, basically. I just love the way it all comes together at the end as well, with Red like gathering all of the pieces of Blue so that she can get through into Garden.
It's very narratively satisfying to sort of walk back through the whole relationship.
And I just love all of the descriptions of her, like, first of all, just doing casual things like drinking the boiled water and then being like, cool, now I'm going to eat this goose heart or this spider or whatever. Like anything to get that piece of Blue. Oh, it's so good.
To love is to be changed, etc., etc.
To love is to be consumed.
Mm-hmm.
And to consume. Morgan, would you like to go first with your final thoughts on This Is How You Lose the Time War?
I love this book. I love how different it is. I love how succinct it is. I think we need more purple prose. We need more poetic writing in sci-fi especially. And yeah, I just want more like this, please. Thank you. I've been on a real sci-fi kick recently, which has been very strange, but it was very refreshing. Sapphic sci-fi specifically.
That's the only kind that matters, let's be real.
How about you?
I could not agree with you more. This is one of my favourite books ever. Is definitely one that I answer sometimes when people ask me what my favourite book is. And it deserves its place on that list. And I get something new out of it every single time I reread it. I could probably reread it every day for the rest of my life and still enjoy it. Yeah, I also desperately want more like this. I feel like it's given me such high standards for like short, weird experimental novellas that when they're not as weird as this, I get so disappointed. And when they don't commit to the bit, if you will, as hard as this does. So if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I have a recommendation that's like, This Is How You Lose the Time War, I am shaking you by the shoulders and begging you to drop it in the comments if you're on YouTube, or message us if you're on any other podcasting platform. Please, I want to know what it is. Please, thank you. In conclusion, you can bury me with this book and I'll be happy with that. On the subject of wanting more books like this, do we have any recommendations for people that love this?
Well, first of all, I have to recommend my girl, Charlie Jane Anders.
Ooh.
I've been rereading some of her books recently in my sci-fi kick. So All the Birds in the Sky, definitely a big one if you like that sort of line between sci-fi and fantasy being merged. And also time travel a little bit, kind of. And just kind of very poetic-y, nature-based stuff. Then that is a good one for you. It is heterosexual, but it's written by a trans woman. So, yeah. And then I read her other book that I just finished today, The City in the Middle of the Night. That doesn't have any, like, canonically trans characters in it, but the main character goes through this very trans-coded journey involving aliens. So I'm going to put it on that shelf and be like, this is basically a trans metaphor. And also, she is a very repressed sapphic. So we love that for her. But yeah, that is definitely one of my recs.
I mean, not to speak for you, but I feel that we would be remiss not to talk about The Locked Tomb. If you're here and haven't read The Locked Tomb, what's going on? But like, the depth of the yearning, the themes, the apocalyptic imagery and vibes, and the poetry of the language, and then also sometimes the silly references to, like, they just feel very similar.
Yeah.
And the sapphics getting to be, like, unhinged about each other.
Yeah.
Independent, desperate way.
The sapphics consuming each other.
Exactly.
Quite literally.
I just remembered something I wanted to talk about. Never mind.
Can insert it in later.
Well, I'll sneak it in and say that it's None of the Ninth made me think of this, but the way that Garden is characterized as very brutal and not like a woo Mother Nature thing. I love it. Make nature up, please, because it really is.
Yeah,
it desperately is. They're out here making zombie ant Nazis and stuff for their own ends. They're messed up, but that is nature. So
that's actually also a really big theme in The City in the Middle of the Night. Is this idea that physical engineering and bioengineering are the same thing?
Oh yes. Yeah, which I feel like it's prominent here. Like, if you think about it in depth, Commandant and Garden are basically just the same in a different font. So,
I mean, obviously Steven Universe. People should go watch Steven Universe.
Yeah, and also I'll say that if you're like late to the Steven Universe party and you're like, oh, there's so much controversy about Steven Universe does not deserve the controversy it gets. I'm just going to say that. You could come for me if you like, somebody that thinks that Steven Universe does deserve it, but I'm just going to say that it was absolutely groundbreaking for what it was doing at the time, and that the music's gorgeous, and that it's so queer.
Yeah.
I'm simply a huge fan of Steven Universe, and I will defend it.
Yes. And also, if you think that there's no way you can possibly have avoided all of the spoilers and you think you know everything about the show, I promise you there are things you don't know, and there are twists that will absolutely kneecap you. Because I went in thinking that I knew all the spoilers.
Oh.
And then season 5, sucker punched me in the face. I don't know how I went like that long without knowing the season 5 twist. I genuinely like.
I was like almost caught up, and I got it. Unfortunately, just someone on Tumblr untagged.
Oof.
But I was still like, oh, and then I still had a good time when I watched the episode. But I do think with Steven Universe as well, if you do, let's say you know all the twists, they're still beautifully foreshadowed and stuff. So I think you will still get a huge amount out of watching it.
I'd love to do a rewatch.
I'm not one of those people that cares that much about spoilers if it's like a good show or a good book. I'm just like, as long as it's executed well, I think it's still enjoyable.
I'm one of those people who will actively look up spoilers and then get more excited because now I know when they're coming.
I'm going to add another recommendation. Again, it's a book that we've done on the show, but it just meshes too well for me not to talk about it because it's another weird little queer novella that does experimental things with form, and it's In the Watchful City by S. Liu. It also explores that idea where you get a little bit of this with Blue about being enmeshed in some kind of organic hive mind consciousness thing city where everyone is sort of like linked in some way, and an ability to sort of use bioengineering, if you like, to like move between bodies, etc. So that very specific thing also features. So if you liked that idea and that aesthetic, like if you were hearing about Blue recuperating in her little gel ponds and thinking, I want to see Blue chilling in a pond, then you should read In the Watchful City.
Yeah.
If you were like, I just want a novel set in Garden, basically. That's kind of what's going on within the Watchful City. A little bit. More colonialism, exploration as well. But
I'm also just going to quickly throw in All Systems Red by Martha Wells.
I was expecting you to recommend this. I'm so desperate to read it.
We've got to read it, Soren. It's so interesting in terms of gender and presentation and queer normative society, but then also still capitalism, even with the queer normative society. It's like, yeah, you can have 7 partners. You are still an indentured servant, though. Have fun.
Damn. How do you even have time to see 7 partners if you're an indentured servant?
Because you're all indentured servants together, Soren, obviously.
Damn. Ethical non-monogamy, non-ethical autonomy.
That one.
I was trying to do something there. And for those that don't know, that's the first book in the Murderbot series by Martha Wells.
Yes. Which is quoted on the back of here. So
you know it's going to be similar.
You know the vibes are good.
Yeah. It almost feels like cheating to recommend an author who's quoted, but I do it all the time anyway, so sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, I do that all the time.
Well, I mean, look, if you liked this because of the language, you should probably read some Madeline Miller, I would say. You know, I would actually be more inclined to recommend The Song of Achilles over Circe in conjunction with this.
Yeah, it's about violence and romance and
and the tragedy, and also that this is predetermined and we can't escape our destinies.
Exactly. Name one hero who was happy I'm going to be the first.
Yeah.
As somebody who wrote their dissertation on Achilles, yes.
Yes.
It's about the little intertextual interesting things and the fact that you as the reader know how it ends, and the gods know how it ends, and even the characters know how it ends, but they also circumvent knowing how it ends because they miss tiny context clues and foreshadowings, which even you as the reader might miss, because if you have a specific lack of knowledge of what certain stories are about. Oh, I could go on about that book for ages, even though I will never ever read it again because I read it far too many times whilst I was writing. But also, I could go on about it for years.
Oh god, I also totally forgot that when we were recommending the Locked Tomb earlier, I wanted to reference specifically the chapter when they're in the bone cave and looking at all of the bone mobiles and stuff. And if you were like, I want to hear more about these bone nuns, then you should definitely read it in the ninth. Because honestly, that chapter just feels like it's set on the ninth house. It's like, what are they doing there?
What are they doing?
So, that concludes Sapphics in Space Summer, although it's always time for Sapphics in Space in our hearts. For the autumn period, which is August, September, October, at the Hidden Bookcase, we are doing ahistorical autumn, which means we will be reading books with alternate histories. And we're kicking things off, bringing on our very beloved editing assistant, Kit Lovick, who is a big Natasha Pulley fan, so with him we will be reading The Kingdoms by Natasha Pulley, which I'm very curious to get Morgan's opinion on. And, you know, if you love time travel, then stick around for this episode as well.
Until then, you're always welcome through the bookcase.
Don't forget to scritch the cat on your way out.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Bookcase, a production of Planar Prod. On this episode, you heard Morgan Greensmith and Soren Rywood discussing This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. You can find them both on Twitter, @TideNigh and Max Gladstone respectively, or visit their websites, amalelmohtar.com and maxgladstone.com for more information. You can find the Hidden Bookcase on Twitter at Hidden Bookcase, and on Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr and TikTok at Hidden Bookcase Podcast. Find out more about Plain Our Prod at plainourprod.com. Know what we should read next, or want to chat to us about what you thought of this episode's read? You can reach us at thehiddenbookcase@gmail.com, send us a DM on social media, or come chat with your fellow bookworms in our growing Discord server. The link is in the show notes. Want to support the Hidden Bookcase? Support us on Patreon for bonus episodes, audio outtakes, playlists and other extras, buy a book through our bookshop.org page, or consider leaving us a rating or review or telling a friend how to find us. Your whispers are the best way for bookworms to discover our show. For our next episode, we'll be kicking off Ahistorical Autumn with The Kingdoms by Natasha Pulley, alongside Kit Lovick, who edits on the Hidden Bookcase. We hope to see you then, and in the meantime, you're always welcome through the bookcase. Hi bookworms, did you miss me? I'm just dropping back in to let you know about Season 3 of Tranthologies, which is now releasing wherever you get your podcasts. Tranthologies is a trans-written anthology podcast with stories in pretty much every genre under the sun. Long-time listeners might be familiar with that name, since Morgan and I have both written and performed on Tranthologies in the past, and there's a fabulous episode written by Morgan which is coming up this Saturday, July 6th, and I have an episode coming up this season as well. There is so much love poured into this show by a fabulous creative team, and we'd be really grateful if you'd check it out. And I'm going to let the creator of Tranthologies, Alex Abrahams, take it away from here.
Tranthologies is an anthology podcast written exclusively by trans people. If you want to experience trans rage...
We are not made to regret existing, or the way we take up space. We are not made to be empty wells of grief and rage. We are not made to be anything at all. We are made for more than this.
Trans love.
To the one whom my heart belongs to. My thoughts have very much been with you this day.
Or trans joy.
But we're not going to change the world overnight. That's not possible. So I think the best thing we can do is let ourselves feel joy, because that's what they don't want or expect us to feel.
We've definitely got something just for you. With over 60 episodes by different writers across different genres and experiences, you're bound to find something you love. Tranthologies Season 3 begins on the 1st of June 2024. We hope you come along to see what wonderful stories we've got in store for you. Join us as we continue to celebrate trans lives and trans stories. But until then, keep being you. Every trans life is beautiful and sacred. And we are so glad to share the world with you. Trans love, trans joy, trans power.